Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Angbolano. Join me this week is Jasper Apolloni. Jasper, how are we doing this evening, my friend?
I'm doing well, Mike. Happy to be on here with you. Sorry we don't have Aaron for this week. At least I know our listeners are, but I know they're sorry. But I promise I will keep the screaming and swearing to a minimum this podcast. I'm looking forward to it, man. I'm happy happy we still have good things to talk about with Pistons basketball, even after seeing a couple of losses since our last recording session.
Yes, a couple of losses, and we're going to touch on those. We're going to touch on sort of the coming down from the high type of deal that we really don't have any experience in doing because there haven't been that many highs of late. But we're going to talk about some of the limitations of this team. We're going to talk about Ausar Thompson, and I'm sure we'll be riffing and raffing on a few other things. But before we get into that, I do want to thank this week's sponsor, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to NHL and UFC. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Another shameless plug. We are going to, of course, talk about our Substack, which if you have not subscribed to, we certainly highly encourage it. I think I actually missed it at the beginning of last week's podcast. I was out of practice. Definitely subscribe to our Substack if you haven't already. It is in the show notes wherever you get your podcasts, or it's in the description if you listen to YouTube, or if you listen to this podcast on YouTube, rather. You get an article every Monday, you get an article every Wednesday, you get this podcast every Friday, plus maybe some ins and outs here and there. Might get an interview or two, might get a special article, if we can get to talk to a player. So, but you won't know when any of that drops unless you are subscribed to our Substack. So certainly please do subscribe if you haven't already. Jasper, Pistons have lost a couple games since we last recorded. Maybe we're the omen of bad luck. The Harden 50-pointer, I know Kawhi and Norman Powell weren't playing, so it kind of necessitated James Harden going bonkers to even have a chance. And even then, it was still a relatively close game. I know the defense was kind of lacked what you would hope to see. But other than the Clippers, which they were also on the second game of a back-to-back, which is pretty crazy that Harden put up 50 at whatever age he is, 35. Some of these losses are, the Pistons fans aren't really accustomed to seeing losses as of late. They were on a winning streak. But there are some limitations to this team, aren't there?
Yeah, certainly. And I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom negativity just because I'm dressed like Luke Danes. It's a little Gilmore Girls reference for any of you guys with boyfriends out there.
My girlfriend is watching that right now. So the fact
as she should. And you know what? I love Gilmore Girls. It's a great show. But yeah, I also just realized I'm like, damn, I really am dressed like Luke Danes right now. It's kind of messed up. If only I could have his swag. But regardless, yeah, I mean, look, there was that loss, and then there was also the loss to the Nuggets since the last time we recorded, and I think we kind of anticipated the Nuggets game might be a loss. People really were hoping, though, after a couple of get-right games against Brooklyn and against Utah, that you could come into LA against a Clippers team that was missing several of its key players and hopefully pull out a win. Especially since they were playing in front of former President Barack Obama, which was kind of like wild to see him just like chilling on the baseline with Steve Ballmer. That was interesting. But yeah, I think, look, a vintage James Harden 50 ball performance where he's getting to the line 21 times. Was that how many times he got to the line? 22, something like that. Where he's getting to the line that often. Ivica Zubac, I don't think, I mean, he maybe missed one hook shot all game, and it felt like he took 50 of them, like every
He
single
was
time that
money.
he was so money. He's always had great touch. That's not like an outlier performance for Zubac. Like, don't get me wrong, that's what he does. Like the guy is money from those looks. Yeah, I think that and the Nuggets game both kind of exposed a little bit of the issues with Detroit. And this isn't to say that these are fatal flaws or that they mean that the Pistons suck. It just is to say that this is a flawed team. This is not the most talented roster in the NBA. And this is a team that has to make up for that lack of top end talent sometimes in ways that can burn you. And you see that a lot in the way that they play defense, especially with the way that they gamble, for steals. And that's been largely positive. They've been gambling for steals. They've been able to keep tight rotations in order to make up for those gambles. And when they've paid off, they've been able to run in transition, which is why the Pistons have been the best transition offense in basketball over the last 2 months now, pretty much. So look, I mean, the positives always come with negatives. And I think a night like last night really exposed that when the Pistons don't play with tight defensive rotations, they were slow to rotate a lot of times last night. When those gambles don't pay off, which they didn't last night. And I think most importantly, when they don't win the paint battle. And that's something I noticed from both of their losses, both with the Clippers and the Nuggets loss. Both those teams were able to score pretty effectively in the paint. And I think really what that shows is because the Pistons play such a gambling, steal happy style, they're going to get really tight on players. And that happened with Harden a lot last night. You saw it so many times where Ausar Thompson got switched off of James Harden. Somebody like Dennis Schroeder gets onto him. They're face guarding him. They're way up in his grill out on the perimeter. And he was able to drive to the lane with relative ease. And so I think, when this team is not able to rotate well, when they're not able to defend the paint, and when they're not able to come away with steals, they really struggle. Last night was a night where I think you really missed Tobias Harris. And again, we've been talking about this all year. His numbers are not sexy. His film does not pop off for you. But when you look at what he brings to them defensively and offensively, like the stability he brings on both ends, I thought last night was really a night where you missed him on both ends of the floor. It really felt like a lot of those looks that the Clippers were getting in the paint wouldn't have been nearly as easy if you had Tobias Harris out there playing defense for a lot of these possessions. So yeah, I just think that that's something like it's not something worth freaking out about. It's not a end of the world situation, and now the Pistons are suddenly bad because James Harden, one of the best players of all time, and like a top five scorer of all time, arguably put up 50 points. That's going to happen. It's Chris Dunn hitting multiple wide open threes. It's getting beaten on the boards after you make Harden miss, and Zubac gets an easy putback. Like that's why the Pistons lost last night. And I think those are things that are fixable, are workable, but also certainly expose the flaws in Detroit's system because they have to work so hard on both ends of the floor in order to make it all work.
That's right. And it's interesting that you brought up the steals too. Because I just looked at Asar's on-off stats. The Pistons are like in the 95th percentile in steals when Asar is on the floor.
Asar's Asar's steal percentage is higher than Dyson Daniels, by the way.
It's
Just so you
but
know.
it's
Yeah,
crazy.
the
It's just
first
like
guy who's going to average like 3+ steals a game in like 30 years. Ausar Thompson, his steal percentage is higher.
it's still higher, and you know it's great that he's back on the court and healthy. But the time he missed, he should be in that sort of Dyson Daniels type of archetype within the how NBA Twitter and how the media is portraying him. Yeah. Tobias is like a connector, I like to think, on both ends of the floor. He kind of just makes things work easier. He's not going to light you up for 25, but he's going to be a connector on offense. He can hit some shots when he needs to. The ball typically, at least this year, typically isn't going to, fall dead in his hands like it did with maybe Jeremy Grant, for example, who was just isolation heaven constantly. And then on the defensive end, he's a big body, and that helps quite a bit. That's like a huge component of defense is just having decent size to be able to stay in front of your man. He's not an elite defender, he never has been, but he's just kind of a connector on defense where you don't have to like necessarily worry about him that much. And they definitely could have used Tobias Harris for sure. Another thing that I saw when I was looking at the box score and when I was looking at cleaning the glass, the Pistons were 21 of 22 at the rim. 21 of 22 with five fouls accrued in that time. Crazy. I mean, insane. But the difference is that they shot 32% from deep while the Clippers shot 90, or I'm sorry, they shot 52%, which is the 97th percentile. So the Clippers game we're kind of overlooking a little bit. The Nuggets game where they just got waxed, I think they were just kind of due for that personally. I mean, Nikola Jokic is bound to go off for a triple double any night, but they just kind of got hosed there. And is there anything worth taking out of that game at all?
No, I mean, I just think it's a loss. And I think even with like the Clippers loss, you can't also overlook the fact like the Clippers needed that win. The Clippers needed to win last night. They have
Yeah,
been slipping in the standings lately. That was like a must-win game for the Clippers. And like honestly, where you're seeing the Eastern playoff race kind of pan out, there aren't really many must wins for the Pistons. Like, I think they've kind of proven themselves as much as they need to. They're going to be in the playoffs. They're going to be somewhere between 4 and 6. Um, they're a good team. They have an established star. They have established young players. They are on the upswing, and like people are talking about them. Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren were just on what is it, First Take or some ESPN show
they
today.
were
I don't know.
on that NBA show with Malika Andrews.
Yes, but regardless, I am a filthy, dirty Brooklyn hipster, so I don't own a TV. So I don't watch it myself, but I saw it online, and I think just at this point, like they're gonna lose some games, they're gonna win games, but they are where they are, and I think we have a good feeling about what this team is. And you saw that in the previous two games against Brooklyn and Utah. If you're a bad team and Detroit comes into your house, I need to take off my belt real quick because you're about to get this. This is what's about
Yeah,
to happen to you. You're about to get spanked.
that's
Um,
made so much better by the fact that your camera was moving as you did that motion.
You're gonna get spanked. That's the thing. Like this team, even on their bad nights, like I thought they just had a bad night against the Clippers, and they still remained very competitive against a team with a star putting in a vintage performance on a must-win. Um,
Yeah,
and they still were competitive. So, like for me, the way I look at it is if this team's focused, if this team's locked in, like when they get to the playoffs, they're going to have growing pains. And I just think that that's something that people need to look at, like the Nuggets game, the Clippers game, and just understand that, like, they might not win a playoff series, guys. And guess what? It will be okay. Like,
it will
it'll be
be.
okay if they lose. As long as they're competitive and as long as they learn from it and they grow from it and they do the right things, it is okay to lose sometimes. And I think that's something that like I really think we should be imparting on our listeners because the expectations for this franchise have changed. The expectations for this core have changed. And I think as a fan base, we need to change our expectations and we need to adjust that. And like, you know what I mean? Like when the Pistons lose a game, it's not all doom and gloom. It's okay. We just got to take the learning elements from it and apply them to the next time you're in that kind of situation. And I think the Pistons have done a great job of that all season. Like JB's had them locked in. I thought it was such a like the way that they came out against Brooklyn after losing to the Nuggets, I think said everything you need to know about this team. You know what I mean? And even
Yeah.
last night, like with everything going against them, they were so frustrated. Like before halftime, you could just see like Ausar and Cade and Bickerstaff just all like kind of at their wits' end. They were really, really annoyed. It was just one of those games. But instead of losing their heads, like they pushed in the fourth quarter and they almost came back and they were in it. And like those are the things you should be taking from these games along with the negatives. Yeah, so I just think that that's like let's have a reframing of in this Pistons
Right.
fan base. We've been losing for so long. Let's reframe how we look at these things.
And just to give a little bit of context of the next couple of games that they have, they play Golden State on Saturday. Then they get Portland, who's been really feisty of late. And, you know, quietly, I saw on FanDuel they were plus 1,600 to make the playoffs.
They're
Or
gonna
I'm
make the
sorry,
play in.
maybe make the
Yeah.
play. I
Oh,
think the play was a
I'd
little
bet
bit
that.
less.
No, dude, have you seen
You
Portland's
should.
schedule? Portland's
Yes,
schedule is like a joke too. They're
I
a
saw them
hundred
play the
percent.
Cavs.
Yeah, dude, they're gonna make the play in. They're 100. Look at like the rest of the West. There's no. They're making the play in. They're like what? They're
Dallas is
28 and
cooked.
34. Dallas is cooked. The Suns are cooked.
Vibes
Those
cannot
are
be worse than Phoenix.
no, no, dude. They're only like a game behind them right now. They're
Yeah,
100% making the playoffs. So that is, I think, like a little bit of a trap game. But that's another game that will
and
tell you a lot
it's
about the
away.
Pistons. But it'll tell you a lot about Detroit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're coming
And then you
off of a
get two
really
games with
frustrating
Washington.
loss. Cures all ills.
Yeah,
At this point,
that's exactly right.
to quote a very unwise man, at this point, it's just like, don't be that team.
Yeah, exactly. And yet the Bucks traded for that guy. What? I just. Then you get the Thunder, which is tough. But then again, schedule softens up, as we said a couple weeks ago in um, one of the podcasts at the beginning of the month. They play the Pelicans. They get the Heat, who are not good. They get Dallas, who maybe actual worst vibes in the entire league. Then they get the Pelicans again, Spurs without Wembanyama, and then they get Cleveland and Minnesota to round out the month. So it gets a little bit harder, but that's a pretty soft schedule. So even if they take a loss to the Clippers, even if you take a loss to Nikola Jokic, there's no shame in getting 50 balled by James Harden. There's no shame in getting a triple double dumped on your head by Nikola Jokic. He's the best player in the league. We'll be fine collectively. But I do think that, they're going to have some growing pains. I look forward to us talking about the shortcomings a little more once we get a playoff series locked in, and then we could actually analyze matchups and things. We haven't been able to do that since like what 2018 when they played the Bucks in the first round, and they didn't win a game then either. Um, but yeah, I think it's good to have tempered expectations, come back to reality a bit. The Eastern Conference is pretty weak. The Pistons are taking advantage of it. There's no doubt they're a lot better than they were last year. But again, this stuff happens. There's good teams in the league, and the Clippers are another playoff team, and obviously the Nuggets are a championship hopeful. But we talked about Ausar Thompson, and he is, after Malik Beasley, Cade, and JB, maybe fifth. Like, where is he on the ranking of most, like, biggest reasons why the Pistons are where they are?
Oh man, frankly, this is something I said on Twitter this week. I said I'm not sure Asar Thompson ever needs a 3-point shot in order to be an all-star like level contributor. Not saying he'll make an all-star team, but to be that level of impactful player. Like I don't know, like Andre Kirilenko, I think maybe made like what one all-star team in his career, and like that guy was one of the most impactful
Now I
players
have to know.
on the court, like game in, game out. Maybe
Talk
it
about
was
a guy in
two.
the wrong era.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, you broke down a little bit of Asar Thompson's metrics. How many did he make? Give me the answer here, Mike. Interrupt me.
I'm pulling up, so keep going. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Come on, you don't have basketball reference just on your home
No,
screen at all times like I
once.
do. One time.
2004,
Yeah,
21
there you
years
go.
ago.
There you go. And Andre
That's
Kirilenko
ludicrous.
was like a top 5 defender, game in, game out. Like his impact. Who was more impactful, Andre Kirilenko or Carlos Boozer? Your answer reveals a lot about how much ball you
That's
know.
very true.
But yeah, like I think I'm at that point with the star because he is such a game breaker for this team. And the way that he has impacted their defense and actually impacted their offense through their defense, you said it, 3.1 steals per 36, which is absurd. The guy is like an absolute ball hawk, and like add in the fact that he's also one of the best screen navigators in the NBA, that he's one of the league leaders in deflections, despite having played only what, like 700 minutes this year or something like that. How many minutes has he played? Let me look. 896, not even 900 minutes. And he's top 20 in deflections for the entire NBA, averaging basically a block per game. He is dunking everything. And I think that when you look at the impact he's having defensively with those steals, with the blocks, with the screen navigation, with the disruption, with just making guys uncomfortable. We saw it so much in that Boston game. Like Jason Tatum, after the first quarter, just could not get comfortable, couldn't get away from Ausar Thompson. And it was totally messing with his head. And that makes teams commit silly fouls. That makes them turn the ball over. It makes them rush. And the way that Ausar Thompson is able to create that disruption, get the Pistons running out in the fast break, and getting easy buckets, it's forcing other teams to then match Detroit's tempo. It's throwing them off of their rhythm. Like that's the thing for me is all the numbers for Ausar are incredible. There is no doubt about it. When you look at just the raw numbers, his per 48, his per 100, what percentile he is, this guy is like 95th and up percentile in every single defensive metric you can look at. But that I think doesn't even fully cover like the range of how much he impacts the game at that end. Like I said, like him just fighting around every screen or being able to duck under screens and pop up so fast to where he can still contest shooters, to where he just gets in guys' grills, to where he just throws them off. He just makes everything tough for the opposing offense. And when I look at that, like that is to me the kind of impact that somebody like Cade Cunningham has on offense, where he's like that is the number one thing with Cade is like he controls tempo at such an elite level. And when I look at Ausar Thompson, I think he does the exact same thing, but defensively. And when you have a player like that, you're talking about somebody that can swing games for you, somebody that can swing playoff series for you. So I guess for me, Mike, like, are you in the same boat I am? Like, do you think Ausar Thompson that not only is what he's doing right now real, but that he still has heights to continue reaching towards, and that he can be a game-changing defender, much in the same way that Cade Cunningham is a game-changing offensive option?
We've certainly shown it against big time players. I mean, he had Jason Tatum in jail for most of that Boston game. And Tatum, I don't know how many points he had. He's going to get his points. That's what elite offensive players do. But he was in jail, just taking the ball away from him. Um, I still worry about a 3-point shot. I still worry a little bit about the offense because if you're looking at playoff series, it's just a giant chess match. And JB, admittedly, seeing it firsthand is not the greatest at chess, but he does have some different tools in his, tool belt. I don't know that without a little bit of an offensive game, and his 3-point shot could always come around. I mean, he's an unfinished product, but I am worried a little bit in a playoff setting. In a regular season setting, it would be just awful in a playoff series. It's like LeBron watching Kawhi come back into the game and swearing. It's kind of like that, not on the same offensive scale, but it's like you see Ausar Thompson come back in, the best player on the opposing team is going to, curse and have it get caught on camera because that's how he is. I think he can be that for like this year and next year and the year after that. But I do think long term, he's going to have some sort of an offensive, not even outbursts, not even growth, just to, be able to do one thing really well on offense to where he's not getting played off the floor because he's just being left alone and letting everybody else fend for themselves. And maybe that gets solved by having other players around him that could insulate him a little bit. I just worry a little bit about that. The defense is incredible, but I do worry about it in a playoff setting just a little bit.
I agree he needs some sort of a jumper. Like, I don't know if it has to be a super reliable 3-point shot. I do agree he needs some sort of like a mid-range or something like that, or else teams are just gonna do whatever they can. But I think the thing that makes him different from a lot of other players is his movement. Like, he's constantly moving on offense, and like he's constantly cutting, or he's sitting right there in the dunker spot. And because the Pistons have been able to get Jalen Duren out closer to the perimeter on DHOs, because now they trust him to drive the ball with his ball handling a lot more, I think that you can mitigate to a certain extent the lack of a jumper in the right playoff settings. We will see
Right.
it. That is the amazing thing about this year is we actually will be able to see it. Unlike last year's when we've been talking about like Cade Cunningham having a great mid-range game and how that would hypothetically translate to the playoffs. Like now we get to actually see it. That will be
Yeah.
nice. Instead of just saying, I think I think this, I think that.
Right.
We'll be able to see it. It's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens to this team offensively in the playoffs because, as we know, Mike, the pace slows down a lot. Teams are very much going to take advantage of um, every single deficit you have on your team to the best of their abilities, and they will attack it over and over and over again. So I think you're really going to see a lot of where this Pistons team is going to need to improve next year in the playoffs. Like we will see. Are they still going to be able to create havoc and get out and run? Are they still going to be able to dominate paint points? Are they going to have enough shooting? Are they going to have are they going to have enough space on the offensive end to make it work? Are they going to have enough explosion offensively outside of Cade Cunningham?
Right.
What are you going to get from Duran and Ausar? Like, there's a lot of questions. And I think the wonderful thing about this season is we're actually going to be able to get some answers to them.
We are, or at least see it live and in action against a team that's vying for a championship. If they play the Knicks, well, like you're hoping, I don't even want to speculate on who they're going to play in the playoffs. There's a lot of things that could happen between now and April. But a series against the Knicks would be very interesting because that's two teams that uh, are going to kind of be plodding along. The Knicks have had some problems with 3-point shooting, and the Pistons have that really hasn't been as big of a problem. The turnovers are a bit of a problem for Detroit. I think they're still bottom 10 in the league in turnovers, but not to speculate too much on the playoffs because we still have a few weeks to go. But it'd be very interesting how to analyze them in a playoff setting.
Mike, also, lastly, don't forget the Pistons' final two games of the season come against Milwaukee. So there's a very good chance the Pistons could literally be waiting until the final game of the season to figure out who they're playing in the playoffs. So yeah, that's something that
Yeah, that's a good
hasn't been
point.
really talked about, but like I think it's a potentially massive like development for the final week of the season. It will matter a lot.
Yes, it definitely will. Jeff, those were our two topics. Do you have anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up this edition of the podcast? Do you want to do Aaron's, um, dad talks sit down on how we all need to subscribe to the podcast and
Yeah.
the
Yeah, why
Substack?
not? I'm the oldest one here. I might as well start taking a little bit of responsibility. God knows I don't do it in the rest of my personal life. So, yeah, I mean, look, as always, we love and appreciate all the support, all of the listeners, all of the people who comment on our YouTube channel every single week, all of you who follow along, whether it's on playback or on here or on Twitter/X. It is always so cool for me to like check my inbox on Twitter and have people who listen to the show like messaging me about what they think about it and how much they enjoy it. It truly does mean the world to us. We really do appreciate it. Don't forget to check out our Substack, Palace of Pistons. Follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok. I know. Even TikTok. That's to all the Visco girls out there. That's a if you wear big filas, that's a that hasn't been relevant since like 2020. Anyway, yeah, follow us TikTok, Instagram, X, and our Substack. Of course, follow us on YouTube. Look, just hit the subscribe button. I know the algorithm pushes it to your front page every single week. Just hit it. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Are you with me? Do you think Ausar is like excellency, destined to be excellency in action, or are you like Mike? You're waiting to see what happens in the playoffs. Regardless, we're excited to have you guys following along with us. We're going to continue to put out content for you. And we just appreciate all of you for following along. So for my co-host, Mike Angulano, I'm Jasper Apollonia. Thank you to our sponsors, Bet Online, and we will see you all next time on the Palace of Pistons podcast, presented by Believe.